Hello, hello, family. Okay, a
Hello.
couple of things. We're doing Akashic Records today because I just really wanted to talk about this and I wasn't able to do it last month because of all of the drama with my health. But I really wanted to talk about it. And part of it is I want to know first, are there any questions you guys have about the Akashic realm? Because I have a bunch of notes that I wanted to talk about, and I really wanted to talk about Earth pre realm. And I think that's the new information. And then the other stuff is just general information that you may have heard in other places or spaces. But if you guys have questions about the Akashic realm or its capabilities or what it's like or anything, I would love to hear that to know like if we should branch off into other directions too. Hi, Judy.
Hi, Jessenia. Okay, so fascinating. And so I guess my main question is who is ultimately in control of it? Because I've been watching some Max Spears, and I know when we first met, you talked about a reconstruction phase. And so I'm wondering um, how comes we have this overlay of this horrible crap we have to deal with. And ultimately, um, what is the purpose? I guess they're big questions. I mean, I know I'm fascinated, thank you, but ultimately, who controls it?
Okay. So it is a very interesting governing system, and the realm is has many levels of governing. And what I mean is, as we find and incorporate new soul groups, they have a say in what happens, but not necessarily control of what happens. That would be many levels above or through the process. But at the highest level, we have a level of counselors. Counselors are kind of voted into position based on their integrity and their connection to Earth and their devotion to the soul group's evolution and their connection to preserving Earth as a place of evolution. And it's really interesting because at this level of consciousness, it's very hard to lie. You cannot lie. So these people are of highest, or these beings are of highest integrity, and there are many other responsibilities and jobs and like for example, there would be what we call governing systems underneath that, because there are whole entire industries established around very specific jobs in life planning and departments. So, like every department would have its own governing system of sorts. And one of the reasons why I know so much about records is because I work there. So, like, I function in this system, and that's where I get all of my information. I get to see it. I get to go to council. I get to see the meetings. I get to see they have trials, they have a whole bunch of different departments that you can go and be a part of. But we have, if you work there, you have access to how you work. I do meet people and souls that have jobs in the realm at soul level, and that's how they continue learning outside of Earth, and that's how they continue getting these experiences. So I have learned a lot about the departments by reading people who work in those departments and realizing the depth of what they do and what they're responsible for and how intricate it is. But it allows me to kind of remember through them. And although I work there, it doesn't mean I specialize in everything, right? So learning their specialty helps me understand more about the realm. My particular job is finding new soul groups. So I search for soul groups and then have to learn about them enough to integrate that knowledge into the records. So I work directly with the records, and in finding these soul groups, they are allowed to merge their consciousness into the system or structure through participation in incarnation if they are compatible, or through observation and planning if they are incompatible. And what that means is some soul groups just simply can't incarnate on Earth. They're not compatible with human bodies. And so they want to participate because Earth is the greatest form of evolution. We have super densified energy and many, many soul groups working in the same field, in the same place, in the same space. So even in observation, it allows them to evolve a lot faster. So even if they can't incarnate, they're usually very excited to be a part of either life planning, spirit guides, integration, or any of the other aspects. And then we get to learn about their gifts. So many different soul groups have different abilities. So they get to come in and kind of show their gifts and their mastery, and we all grow and evolve together. There's also ascended masters. Ascended masters are not at the governing position. They're actually more like professors at a college, which I think is really interesting because a lot of people put a lot of emphasis on ascended masters. When we are assigned to Earth, we are usually assigned an ascended master to continue our studies. And they teach us the things that they have mastered here. So they are teachers and professors, and we go to them for help and support. And many of us are assigned one, but it doesn't mean you can't go to another professor for help or support. So the governing system would be a bunch of highly evolved beings that have a council at the highest level. But again, that's after many, many levels of checks and balances and communication and support and integration and supporting everybody's evolution. And they call themselves Grand Council. And they decide if a trial needs to be had. They decide if changes need to be made. They decide they have even gotten so specific as to decide if somebody's life's karma should be imputed or not. So they do go all the way to the individual when it comes to understanding incarnation and life and what's going on here. And it has to serve the greater good. And there are what we call universal laws that they have to comply to, and they push on the realm and the realm's participants. So we have a whole entire series of law in order that they push and manage. And by karmic imputation, I mean that they have specifically had to review lives to figure out if the karmic debt was the life responsibility or the environment's responsibility. And an example of this was there was this child whose parents became ill unplanned. And when they became ill unplanned, she was orphaned. And in being orphaned, she was sexually abused and mistreated by the community. And even though she was eventually saved by an older woman who lived on the outskirts of town, she was still highly traumatized, and there was no therapy or understanding of trauma or breaking down trauma at that time. And the older woman had tried to teach her her ways and loved her and protected her and provided for her. But then the older woman was murdered violently in front of her. So she went on a rampage and became a murderer. And they said that she was never given the opportunity to heal from the circumstances she was given, and therefore the karma was not hers to carry. It was the environment's karma. So it was the people who abused her that should carry the karma of her weight and her decisions. And I thought that that was really fascinating because for us, we have access to psychology and repair and healing. So we have more accountability to our own debts than someone may have had 600 years ago, where there was zero support and you were just kind of thrown to the wolves if your parents didn't exist. There was not even orphanages in her area or city. So there was nobody to help her, nobody to support her. So they had reviewed that in court, kind of, in trial, to ensure that she was not being punished for something she had no control over, which I thought was really fascinating. But that would be the highest level of governing in the realm. That does not mean that there's other levels of governing. For example, the Palladians have a Palladian council. That is simply two Palladians. They do manage communication on Earth. They do interact with the realm. They do follow universal law, but they're not managing the Akashic realm. They're managing mostly Palladians, but they do protect and defend. So they do communicate to other soul groups. Does that answer your question or give you more questions? We can do both. You're going in and out because you
Yeah.
keep
Okay.
Just making sure I'm not missing you.
Yeah, I'm going to stop. Okay. So, yes, it does. It does. I just am curious as to whether it also has a say so on the control of Earth and our ability to have, the forces that aren't in our best interest, to have, ability to maintain or control them or keep them to a certain extent so we are able to evolve?
Right. And that's a really good question. If they control everything and create universal law, manage incarnation, and supervise everything, why do we have things like demonic entities and energies that don't belong here and negative soul groups that take over? Um, well, it's in understanding energy transfer, and free will. They're not allowed here. It is against the law, which is why so many of those ascended masters, guides, and highly evolved souls help us remove them of Earth when we spot and track them. But essentially, what allows them through is that humans are deep in their own personal suffering. So, our vibrational frequency and attunement being so low in some places of Earth with all the suffering we create ourselves becomes a window or portal to these other dimensions and realms where we let them in. Also, we don't always listen. So, for example, CERN is a very high-end evolutionary device that does open interdimensional portals. And scientists behind CERN did not want to hear any of that mumbo jumbo and shit because they didn't believe in it. Now they have found the reality that they are in fact opening other portals and doors, and they have created side effects they can't necessarily control. Now, that is important for human evolution because we need to understand this interdimensional technology so we can continue evolving. So every evolution, every invention, every decision does have a negative side effect. Even plastic. Plastic was vital to the medical system. Plastic made the medical system hygienic. It made it easier to process. It made it more efficient and more affordable for people. The other side effect of that is it also is destroying our planet and creating unnecessary trash and garbage and pollution, and it is taken over and is not good for your body. But in terms of the positive side effect, even plastic had positive implications on Earth. And understanding that, making things more affordable for people, more available to people, helping people be clothed and protected, right? Making things like more financially obtainable did help billions of people. But it's also, again, the benefit always has equal opposite counteractability. So it's an understanding that there is no such thing as all good. Every light casts a shadow, and there is polarity on Earth, and we do have duality. And we are the trauma, and therefore we pull in trauma, right? We absorb, pull in, or sometimes it's just misusing gifts that we don't know where we're going or what we're doing or what we're calling in. And because we are so low vibrational, we can accidentally pull in things at that vibration. You know, if I'm deeply suffering, haven't healed, haven't cleared my energy, have a lot of lives of trauma, it's easier for me to attune to that frequency or that place or space and talk to very destructive souls or even demonic entities and pull them in for information. They're easier to get to at my consciousness, at my level. So we do not allow them. They're not supposed to be here, but it is a side effect of the experience that we do not have proper training or proper control. And because gifts have been so controlled on Earth and limited on Earth, we cannot, like, people do not have the practices that they used to have. And what I mean by that is in so many lifetimes, we've been murdered and killed for even being a little bit gifted. So of course, we never developed our gifts. We never developed control, protection, and any of the above. In fact, we mostly use our gifts in negativity at first because that's where they were used last, through trauma, if that makes sense. Now, the other side of this is something that's actually on my chart and I wanted to talk about. There was a bunch of alien involvement on Earth in the beginning of Earth. And this is really important to understand because Earth was a free-for-all. We call them the ancient ones. The ancient ones who crossed Earth were alien species. They could get here on their spaceships. They established civilizations. They genetically engineered animals on Earth, plants on Earth, Earth's atmosphere, Earth's terrain. They flooded Earth. They did a lot of things that would now be considered illegal in the realm. Actually, the flooding came after and they had permission for that, and I can explain that part. But they did a lot of things that would now be considered illegal. And the reason they were able to do those things is because life was not conscious on Earth. And that's really important to understand. The realm only involves itself in conscious life. And the story of Adam and Eve is a story of life becoming conscious. It was Eve's ability to question authority and to question her master that established consciousness, which is when the Akashic realm has to step in and now manage and protect the species on Earth. So that means no more outside intrusion. Everything must be contracted. Everything must go through the realm. Everything must be pre-approved. And so for many, many, many thousands of years, we have had a very controlled, closed system where we do have alien visitations and alien interactions, but they are very controlled and contracted. So the Akashic realm knows who's coming here, who's landing here. And if they're not allowed, we have wars. They've been blasted out of space. We've fought them. We've protected Earth. We've done, even in my one lifetime, I've seen multiple galactic wars protecting Earth and Earth's inhabitants. So it is highly protected. But recently, we've had this whole other reality where the Akashic realm has approved outside interference. And that's mind blowing because that's new to Earth. They've approved outside interference when it comes to nuclear weapons. They will not let humans utilize nuclear weapons on Earth. They will not let the most unevolved species in all of, the galaxy destroy a planet that houses all of these beings. They refuse to let it happen. So they have been interfering. They will make them disappear. They will shut them down. They will turn them off. And they've been interfering for a very long time. I think since the 1940s actually or the 1930s. It was actually about 30 years before the development of CERN that they were able to interfere with science and development to create the technology to start manipulating nuclear weapons and stop them from being used and create more peace on Earth. Which is really fascinating because a lot of Earth's leaders don't even know that. They think they're threatening each other with nuclear war and that they have that ability, but they don't. They're just kind of throwing around empty promises. So we have allowed interference at that level, but it is very different than all other interference. They do still have contracts, and it's interesting because a lot of those contracts are to support our own evolution. For example, they are allowed to take a certain amount of humans from Earth. But that is because they are studying humans, creating science and technology for our diseases and illnesses, and then they are sending that information back to Earth. So for example, that benefits us. So there is this exchange where they can observe humans and study them, and we can get information about illnesses, diseases, and issues. Like Spirit said, there's a solution for every problem, but we aren't evolved enough to understand all of those. So we utilize outside intelligence to do that. They obviously have advanced technology, traveling technology, communication technology, and gifts. So part of it is they teach us those things, and we give them something. Whether it be animals, for example, some of them like cows. For them, that's like an exquisite, dessert of sorts. So some of them are making exchanges for other things that we wouldn't fully understand. Most of these alien species are very evolved and positive. They just simply are so telepathic that they can't really harm or hurt people or others. They're very connected. But the other side of this is not all these alien species think like us or have the same goals, right? Some of their goals are almost too evolved to be personal, or they don't understand emotion. Emotion is very very distinguished to Earth and Earth's atmosphere, which is what makes Earth so difficult because it amplifies the human ability and is so dense. And part of that is we feel deeper. So the emotion here is more intense than any other incarnation most of us have ever experienced. So there are some very evolved species that simply don't understand emotion. And we might think they are monsters or cruel or this or that. And it's because they're all science-based and they don't care about our feelings. So their goals are different, but it doesn't mean that they are cruel. It may feel cruel to us. So humans might be afraid of their intentions or their way of communicating because they don't care about feelings. So we do manage interference, outward connection, alien connection. They had denied it for many, many centuries because conscious beings have different goals. Conscious beings must develop consciousness and biology without interference in order to be the strongest genetic version of ourselves. And I thought this was really fascinating because I thought, what's the fascination with human life, right? Like, why are we so special that they want to observe us and spy on us and watch us grow, and there's not allowed to be any interference? Biological life is incredibly fragile. And the second you start interfering in biological life, you start destroying genetic patterns that create survival. And it's kind of like the Darwin theme, that in the Darwin theme or theory, life strengthens itself. It adapts to its environment, and the weaker of the species is naturally goes away. And the second an outside species starts interfering, whether it be through cloning or genetic engineering or involvement in our wars and involvement in our lives, we start supporting the weaker species, which means Earth as a whole will actually crumble. All of biology on Earth will eventually crumble. So there's some much greater understanding of this, is that life has its own consciousness. And in order for life's own consciousness to develop positively, we must not interfere, which is also why a lot of these highly evolved species have issues with fertility, because they have done way too much interference into their own biology and into their own genetic aspects. So they're desperate to understand human fertility and also understand human DNA and let it develop naturally, if that makes sense. So it's like the more involved we get in this, the more we can destroy the future of life at all. And humans, part of the reason why human incarnation is so powerful and necessary is because we have these biological bodies. In other incarnations, we may have some biological bodies, but they're not capable of the things humans are. And in a lot of incarnations, it's mostly technology, which I thought was fascinating, meaning like they've evolved so much that they no longer use biology, they only use technology. So there is no biological blueprint or imprint. It is body to body transfer, and they are mechanisms, like more machine than biology, if that makes sense. So our lives are very precious to the overall incarnation system and cycle, and the biology of Earth is incredibly precious, and they're trying their best to maintain it and preserve it. It's also a hub for resources, because some planets have been so destroyed that they no longer have resources. So some of the exchanges are that they take resources from Earth in exchange for education and evolution and things that we've forgotten or need to remember or need to learn. So there's a lot of different types of contracts that have been established through the realm. I think that answers your question and 30 others. Judy?
Yes, thank you, Jessenia. Yes, fascinating. Thank you.
Okay, welcome. Maria?
Yeah, it's everything you didn't want to know and want to know about Akashic Records. This is great. I was looking forward to this. Okay, I have three questions, and I think they all go together, so I'm just going to say them and you can do your thing. Number one, I noticed when we're doing some healing within the Akashic Records, it kind of affects the current timeline to a certain degree. And so when you're doing all these major shifts, like doesn't that affect the timeline in general? Is there like a limitation as to how far you can go to change an Akashic record in a person? I don't know if there are like limitations on that, because that could really have a major impact on the planet. And is there so regarding the timeline, and also what does happen when I know viscerally I felt some changes working with the Akashic records, but what does happen? And also the other thing is on the status of the planet, like what is the current status on the planet regarding the Akashic records? I know there's a lot of breaking down, and I know new things are emerging, but it's pretty, the chaos. I know I'm not focused on the chaos. I just see other things are emerging. Does that have to do with the Akashic records right now? Does that make sense?
Yeah, lots of really good questions. I hope I remember them all. The
Okay.
first one, let's talk about past life repair. That's a really great question. Yes, when we go back into a past life, I realized one time going back into a past life that the being I was communicating with and asking questions started asking me questions. And I realized right then and there that I was actually time traveling. It wasn't just going into a life to view it. I was actually shifting the perspective of the being in the life, which allowed them to no longer take their trauma into future lives. So it was about consciously correcting a timeline so that it no longer bled into the other timelines. And that was really mind blowing for me because I never considered that that's what we were doing. And that is exactly why Spirit says be hyper conscious of who reads you, be hyper conscious of who you let into your energy field, because they do have the ability to influence other versions of you and not just you. And that's why Akashic records are so highly protected, because they can, in fact, shift the timeline. So, and they do, that's the purpose of it. The idea is that we are at a place in Earth's reality that is so hyper intense and aggressive and sensitive that we either go into extreme collapse or we go into extreme evolution. So the reason we're allowed to do all this interdimensional timeline repair and healing is because it's needed. It's absolutely needed to ascend Earth, to get Earth to a place where we can continue growing and maintain Earth. So the idea is we're trying to shift the timeline. We're trying to shift the timeline so aggressively that we can fall off the trajectory of like literally imminent nuclear disaster and war and then apocalypse, which is where we were going at the beginning of this life, to be honest. And we are not there yet. We are steering over it. So it's working, but it requires a lot more work. It requires a lot more intensity. And I've said it before, and I truly mean it, that this lifetime is probably the most important lifetime any of us have ever had, because the work we do here matters, and it is aggressively shifting the timeline on purpose. Now, the timeline shifting started happening when aliens had access to Earth and were allowed to interfere in human behavior and decisions. For example, every single time a nuclear bomb is averted, we enter another timeline. So this is already creating and fracturing our reality. And that's why it's so important that we continue fracturing our reality in ways that benefit us as individuals. So this also means we have access to higher levels of manifestation and recreation, and that our futures are not necessarily built in stone. We can alter our future for the best possible version of ourselves in this constant fracturing. So we could use it for ourselves. We could use it for the world. We could use it for evolution. We could also use it for self-destruction. Like I said, every positive has a negative. But it seems that most of us are using it for good, but it can be very confusing because in that timeline fracturing, essentially your whole entire future might change like this. So it sometimes feels like you are lost and confused and you don't know what's next, because everything, the way Spirit showed it to me when visualizing it is like somebody smashing their fist on a table of Legos, and the Legos reconstructing every time into like a new city, a new landscape, a new world. And that's what it felt like. So there is a lot of timeline fracturing that is absolutely real. And because of that, like relationships are shifting, futures are shifting, goals are shifting. But in general, our purpose, if we are aligned to our purpose, it is a soul level mission. And that soul level mission remains the same, whether we are on this timeline or the 32nd timeline, because that's how we're constructed. That's how we've mastered our lives. That's what we're here to do. So if you are connected to that soul level purpose, you will feel solid in the changes coming. If you are not solid in the changes coming, it's likely because you're still wondering what your purpose is. So it is a part of the process and very dangerous. Now, there are lives which are fundamental to human life that cannot be touched. And I've seen these lives before where it's interesting. I cannot go in and heal them. I have to simply observe them from the outside, and nobody's allowed to touch them because they are somehow fundamental for human evolution and they cannot be altered. So those lives are also very interesting to understand. They're almost like anchors to Earth's existence and Earth's evolution, and they just cannot be altered, core memories of sorts. So we can observe them to understand the trauma, the wound, and the side effects that are affecting the person in the present, but we have to work through them differently. We can't correct them at the source because we cannot interfere with those. What was the second question?
By the way, is Jesus Christ one of those? Like that kind of?
Kind of.
Okay.
Some incidences of his life are, but for the most part, his life is not. It is accessible and able to be healed. There was a lot of trauma. A lot of people don't understand the trauma in being called everybody's savior and being sacrificial at that level, and being forced almost or pressured into healing and being everybody's miracle. It's a heavy, heavy weight and burden to carry. So there was healing that needed to be done on that timeline for sure. Because that was almost like tainting the earth. It was destroying earth.
Yeah.
There was a lot of side effects to that.
Well, the questions I asked related to the timeline changes. So you confirm that that is happening, and I feel like honestly, it's quick now. I know how to. I'm working with it more. I feel like we are lately. We've been bending time, suspending time, changing realities fairly quickly without. As long as you don't get attached to, oh, it's supposed to be this way. It's like so easy. It's much
Yeah.
easier to change reality. The question was status on the planet. You just asked that. But so what happens, like what when you do change an Akashic record, what's the process of what happens to someone's life in the present? Um, from yeah, observe your perspective. Like I know a visceral feeling I've had, but what actually is happening?
So the way humans like to try to heal is they like to correct their behavior in this life. And they try to retrain and retrain and retrain and retrain. But oftentimes there's like this deep void and longing that always anchors them back to old behaviors and patterns. And we've all seen this in people we love. That it's like no matter how much they try to heal, they're very much the same, right? They put in all this effort, but they revert back to their old patterns, their old self, their old behavior. That is a sign that they have trauma outside of this life. It almost feels like you cannot pull out of this track, this belief system, this pattern, this obsession. Action isn't enough, right? Healing in this life isn't enough. So what we find is when it's established in a past life, we carry it into every other life. So somewhere on this timeline, a version of you believes in this pattern, has suffered from this pattern, and is still suffering from this pattern. So what happens is when we go back to that source, find it, correct it, it actually shifts the future. So it's like time travel. It completely changes the reality of all the lives that happened after that. And therefore, they're no longer carrying it. So by the time it gets to you, it almost feels like it doesn't exist anymore at all. And now it is your job to correct your behavior. And it's easier to do. You just feel like you can change your behavior. Now, if you decide not to change your behavior, you could do that too. We have free will, and a lot of humans are very behaviorally trained. They can get stuck in old habits. But at that point, it's just a habit. It's not a trauma, if that makes sense. So we do have to take action on it. And that's why it's so important to know what we're clearing and what happened there and how that affected us and the psychology behind it. And this is why I also say, like, people who go in there like, oh, you had a past life, you were a whore. That's it. That's not a real past life reading because it does none of that. It doesn't allow you to understand your wounds, your patterns, your traumas, your anchors, and where you are still stuck. So there's no benefit in that at all. That would not be a real past life reading. That's just somebody making snap judgments of you. So I would be very offended if somebody said that to me because really they're saying you look like a whore. But it's not a real reading. And I'm only saying that example because I was actually in a group where somebody did that and it made me laugh so bad. They were like, oh, you were a 1920s whore and you were a gangster and you were this. And I was like, none of that is real. You're just making snap judgments based on what they look like. And that was obviously misuse of gifts. But we go into it for that exact purpose, to alleviate all of the lives after you, to free all of the lives after you. Sometimes it's just that past life is haunting, and those are actually the easiest to clear, but you can create negative karma in a haunting. You can still negatively affect the people around. Actually, all hauntings create negative karma because in order to survive as a haunting, you have to absorb or siphon energy from the people around you, negative karma. So sometimes it's simply helping those past lives get to where they're supposed to be that creates the ripple effect that positively affects and aligns you into the better version of yourself. So it is like time travel. And that's the point of it. That's why it causes such tremendous changes and impacts in our present moment. But also you can make more of it based on your behavioral changes, your self-awareness, how driven you are to continue evolving and growing. Some people obviously aren't. So in that case, like they're just going to be the same people. They're just going to feel more enlightened and lighter and more powerful, which can actually be a little bit dangerous, right? We have more power fueled into our trauma in this life. which is why when I work with people, it's usually about this life first and then past life second. We have to clear you enough to get you to a place where you understand your power and your abilities and can take accountability when you get more power, because you do get more power every time you clear a life.
Awesome. Thank you.
Very welcome. Do you have a third question, or did we already answer that one?
I think that was it. I guess the other thing was about the the status of the planet right now, but I think you addressed it, what's happening. It's really fascinating to watch.
Right now, we are being completely infiltrated and supported by alien species for 100%. They're here, they have bases on Earth. They're like around us all the time. They're very involved in what's happening, and our leaders are children. So they understand that our leaders are children and cannot stabilize Earth, and they've taken over. And that's more new. Like I said, since 30 years before CERN was built, about, I think I have the exact date somewhere, but I don't know where it is.
But before you move on, Justine, I just have to tell you share, if you haven't seen the show, everybody, Good Omens. I think it's on Netflix. Good Omens. It's a series. It's about an angel and someone from the underworld here on Earth working to change timeline, to keep the peace and all. It's so fascinating. They really do get into Akashic records, and it's like really funny too. It's like it's spot on, and it's humorous as well. Highly
I
recommended.
love that. I've never heard of that. I'll definitely
I'll
have to
put it in
watch
the
it.
chat.
Thank you. Hi, Chad.
Uh, Ditto on Good Omens, a brilliant show. Um, and actually, my physics professor worked at CERN. So, um, anyways, so one thing that I was always taught from my mother and my grandmother when I was young was that the Akashic records were basically a repository of everything. Everything is recorded there.
Mhm.
Good, bad, ugly, everything. So it wasn't necessarily that if you tapped into the Akashic records, you can tap into all those records irrespective of timeline, but it's not necessarily that it's always true, right? So
Mhm.
so that's one thing, is if you see that as the same way. And then separately in the Vedic in the Vedas and Vedic tradition, there's on the very finest level of relative creation, there's a field that they call a Ritambara Pragya. Ritambara Pragya is that which knows only truth. And on that level, like, it's kind of like you were talking about the guys that can't lie, right? It's like at that level, you only know truth at that level. So I was always kind of had this thing, and I haven't really just done the research into it, but the difference between those two, or if that is a correct understanding of the Akashic records and how that relates to that level of Ritambara Pragya. I don't know if that
Yes,
makes
that is a
sense.
beautiful saying. So the way spirit says it to me is, the closer you get to truth, the closer you get to spirit, because
Right.
that is the foundation of connection, right? We cannot understand ourselves in any layer of delusion. So we must shatter our own delusion with ourselves, and that's in healing, right? Understanding our wounds, we don't let our wounds dictate our personality, our decisions, our behaviors. We move in truth. We move in truth to ourselves, and therefore connect more to the people around us. And yes, I that's a really good question. And part of the misuse of psychic abilities on Earth is a lot of people don't understand the idea of perspective or the functionality of the brain. The brain reviews its life based on its belief systems. So what's true to you is very different than what's true to Michael. You guys have had incredibly different lives, but it does not make your perspectives wrong. It is, your perspective is a side effect of your programming. So when we are reviewing people with this ability, with this psychic ability, I'm going into the life and seeing life as they perceived it 100%. And that could have mistruths in it. That could have lies. It could have delusion or misinformation. But the idea is, it is my job as a reader to take my abilities and recognize what I am reading and compare their reality to the collective reality of that time, which I can do by tapping into other people's consciousness and seeing how they were perceived, and then comparing the two and helping that client find healing through their delusion. But yes, it would record their delusion, their experiences, but only how they programmed it. And when we read records, that's exactly what happens. We don't go into a story as omniscient. We go into a story as an individual, as a perspective, as how they saw it. And we can leap to different consciousnesses and see how other people perceived it, because that is the only truth that we know. It is the perception of the individual. And that's the only type of healing we can permit to someone, is understanding their perspective, how they got there, and how that reality is true for them, and allowing ourselves to see beyond our own truth. So it is important to understand truth can be subjective to the individual, but it is established by their real life experiences, belief systems, past lives, traumas. So it is still a fact to them in their perception, through perception, or the law of perception. So that's important to understand. That's why I say past life readings, actually, past life regressions can be dangerous because of this. I've had a bunch of circumstances where I have reviewed Dolores Cannon's work and could see how she was misinformed based on the perception of the individual, because she interpreted as 100% truth and not perception. And she didn't have the ability to see it as perception because she was an outside observer. So she was just asking questions based on her knowledge, her database, and therefore was creating a certain type of persuasion and information channeling and misinformation with her channeling. Although I adore her and love her and think what she did was super important for Earth, I'm not saying what she did was wrong, but it is a very interesting way that we get misinformation. Because she does not understand perception. So some people she doesn't recognize are feeding in their delusion or their mental illness into some of these sessions because they were mentally ill in that life. For example, if one of these beings had schizophrenia and they're connected to that past life of schizophrenia, they're going to see the world through a schizophrenic lens. And she's going to observe that from the outside and believe everything that they're saying as truth. But the reality is they were living in their own mental illness and delusion. So it could create a lot of misinformation and a lot of dangers in doing that. There are a lot of dangers in reading past lives in general, which is why it's so highly protected and structured. We do have access to our records. That's really important to understand. Like, every individual has access to their higher self. Your higher self houses all of your past lives. So you have access to your database. You cannot, it's not taken from you. It's not restricted to you. But do we have access to all other records in times and spaces? Not usually, because it is such a delicate system, and we can interfere and we can interject and we can misinterpret the information and therefore affect everyone after us. Your life you have to review, but the idea is when you go back and review your own past lives, you likely wouldn't change any of them because you did what you did because you thought it was best for you in that moment and in that time. You're still going to believe that, right? The brain does what the brain knows. So you're not likely to change without outside interference or guidance. So even if you see your past lives, it's not something you're likely to interfere in. And it's a different type of view. Like, you have the free will to alter all your own lives and all your own behavior. We cannot stop you from doing that unless it's a protected, anchored life. Like I said, they're very rare, but they do exist. So the way we access the realm is very different from person to person. There are, in fact, only a couple of guides that are allowed into the realm. And again, there is this level of purity you must match and this level of truth you must match, because they have to trust you to not alter records, not interfere, and not interject or judge, because there's a lot going on in there. So you have to, so most people are accessing records through other guides, spirit guides, records transfers, messengers, or through themselves or their higher self, because it is a very protected database. And also it does have all that is on Earth and all of the soul groups on Earth, but we are constantly learning new things. So if we are constantly learning new things and meeting new soul groups and being introduced to new galaxies and ways of thinking and being, then it technically doesn't have all of the information known to creation, right? It's always growing and evolving, which is fascinating to consider that we're still learning new things at that level. And that's really beautiful. We also have other databases outside of the Akashic realm. So for example, there's the Lemurian database, and there are individuals who carry the database of their soul group that has now been extinct, and they're like the last survivors. So they carry the database within their energy field. So they're still integrating that into the records. It's more like they're plugging in to download it. But again, so that means that we're still retrieving and absorbing information into the database at all times. So it is one of the largest databases we have ever known. But there's infinite amounts of soul groups and galaxies. There could be other databases out there.
Well, that was kind of like the point that my mom was always trying to make, is that when somebody's saying they're channeling, right, a certain person or a certain records or whatever, you actually don't know like on what level or what perspective they're actually tapping. So in other words, just because they say they're channeling doesn't necessarily that the information that they're channeling is actually correct.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of like the thing. Just take it all into, certain grain of salt. It's like,
yeah, absolutely. And if somebody can explain to you what they're doing or who they're talking to, that would be a major red flag for sure, that they can't explain who or what they're talking to. And I would always ask, are you observing from the outside or are you observing from the inside? And what that means is like, is this omniscient third person? Because that's all judgment. That's all their own perspective. They're essentially saying, this is my interpretation of it. If they're reading the thoughts and memory of the individual, they're seeing a perspective completely outside of theirs. They're seeing how that person thinks, how that person perceived life. And that's much more powerful a perspective than the personalized one, than our assumption. It's much more personal than our assumption.
But again, it's but of that person's perspective.
So there is always going to be some level of interference, and that's really important to understand. Our brain is a filter, especially when it comes to psychic abilities and channeling. And one of the examples I have for this that used to crack me up so much, and it's not appropriate, so I apologize in advance, but I was watching this like ancient Egypt history, whatever, and they found these funny jars, and they were saying that and immediately I was like, oh my God, those jars are birth control. They used to like come in those jars, and they would put herbs in them to like make it not smell because it would smell over time. And then they go off and say some crazy stuff like, oh, these jars were ritualistic, and they would place them around the people when they were having intercourse and do like magic and spells, and they were filled with herbs and all this other stuff. And they literally show a scroll where they're holding the jar every time they're having sex. And I was like, people are so stupid. They just made their whole entire assumption based on what they wanted to believe. And they wanted to believe that Egyptians didn't understand fertility when they actually did. And they had a system to prevent unwanted pregnancies, but they didn't want to believe that, right? And then like 30 years later, there was some scientific discovery around art where they actually showed the fertility process, and they were amazed. They were like, how do they know that? How do they know that there's eggs and sperm? Because they didn't have magnifying glasses, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So then they realized, oh, they did understand fertility. And it would have changed their whole perspective on the jars, right? If they had just stopped assuming they didn't know any better, if they had stopped assuming that everybody before them was stupid. So I thought it was fascinating because I immediately knew what it was because they told me I could see it, right? You create a psychic link and you could see them using it. I'm like, well, that's interesting. But they had created their own assumption, and historians often do that. Our architect, what do you call it? Anthropologists, or what do you call the people who dig up stuff? Archaeologists. Yeah, there we go. They often do that. They often assume they know how something was used based on their very limited perspective and perception that everyone before them was stupid. And they usually misinform us, to be honest. So it's important to recognize that it happens in this life, and it definitely happens with gifts, and it definitely happens in past lives. So, and Spirit explained to me one time that all the information in the universe is irrelevant and unimportant unless we understand it. So the idea is the message is only going to be as powerful as your channel, right? How much you understand from the message depends on your brain and your development of your gift and your development of your reality and how you understand your reality. So even when I was first getting information, it wasn't like, it didn't change in me because any other reason except for that I started understanding bits and pieces and building a foundation around what they were teaching me and started learning new things outside of my human body and human mind. So the messages could evolve. They were evolved, but I didn't understand the evolution of them until I started evolving. So the channel always matters, is what I'm trying to say. The channel will always matter. And they absolutely will reflect onto your readings. If you have someone who's deeply suffering and can't get out of their head and self-destructive, then the messages are going to be seen through that lens, and it'll be harder for them to see a positive input or outlet. If you have someone who's constantly working on themselves, taking accountability, transforming their world, then you're going to see that in the readings and in the channel systems. If you have someone who's very intelligent, you'll see that in the readings and in the messages. So it does always reflect. There's no way to be 100% unbiased while being human. But it is important to correct as many biases as we can to be clearer channels.
Yeah, that was kind of like the idea. Because I've seen also many ones that like they're like, okay, I say they have different channels that are open and a lot of others that are closed, right? Physiologically, they may be completely messed up and they may have some psychic ability, but it, like you said, is coming through that filter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So that was kind of the question, and also the highest and best use of accessing the Akashic records.
Mm-hmm.
That's my last thing.
So what do you mean by that? Is that a question?
Yeah, it's basically, in other words, it's like, okay, so if we have we have that ability to tap into our own, and you like, let's say you're able to tap into others. What's the highest and best use as a human of accessing the Akashic records during this lifetime and to benefit ourselves and the planet?
Right. So the best way to explain this is that first dimensional thinking only perceives the present moment. Second dimensional thinking understands that the past affects the present moment. Third dimensional thinking understands that the past and present affects the future. Fourth dimensional thinking is realizing that the soul affects our present moment and the past, present, and the future. And as we move into those levels of integration, we actually ascend into other dimensions and realms of thinking, which allows us to access different technologies and sciences. For example, what is limiting us in terms of travel, technology, and evolution is that we can't understand interdimensional science. And therefore, we need to be interdimensional beings. If I have healed 700 versions of myself, I have accessed 700 dimensions of myself, 700 realities of myself. So I am naturally attuning to my interdimensional self, my interdimensional reality, and ascending into higher versions of myself. But I also redirect that misused power and trauma and negative karma back into this reality where I'm more powerful, more integrated, have stronger abilities, and can make more change and then shift the timeline in positive ways. So it helps us heal, it helps us realign, it helps us attune to our bodies, it helps us be more grounded in our bodies. The more trauma we have, the harder it is to be present in our physical bodies. That's why we have so much dissociation and distraction and addiction, because we're running from our pain, we're running from our trauma. And it helps us be more controlled, so stronger manifestors of energy, and that's required for Earth's evolution, meaning we have to be interdimensional beings to develop interdimensional sciences.
Thank you. I'll let somebody else jump in.
Rosalind, you guys are asking great questions. I'm so excited.
Greetings. I was wondering, when I had my Akashic Records reading, I am a part of the Lemurian. I had my eyes dilated, so excuse me because I can hardly see.
Mm-hmm.
Physically, I can hardly see. So I was wondering if and my soul group was a name that couldn't be pronounced. And so we just referred to them as the Rainbow People.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, I thought I heard you say that soul groups, there are so many different ones, and that they're evolving as time goes by. So, or what we consider as time. So, in that evolution, would that soul group change? Like, would the name be able to be pronounced, or would there be more information about them, or is there an evolution of this? If there is an evolution of the soul group, how would I know that? And
Well,
does
you
that
carry all
happen?
the information of your soul group. So if I wanted to channel your soul group's history for 26 hours, I could. I could sit here with you and we could go through its origin story, its trauma, its lessons, its structure, how they developed when they got here. We could go through all of that, but it is a lot of information. And even in 16 hours, I feel like we wouldn't learn much that can help you here, right? Because a lot of us are here because it's different than our soul group. It's something new. We're here to learn something new. So it's important to understand the foundation of our character and how it presents on earth. And that's usually what we talk about. But if I wanted to channel it through you, I could. You have it. You're the source of your own soul group's information. There have only been like one or two rare situations where the person rejected their soul level identity because of some aggressive, severe trauma that they no longer remembered it. It was somehow severed from their consciousness, whether it be through trauma or a personal decision to remove that information because they felt like it no longer served them or it created too much pain in them. And that can be very, very traumatizing. It essentially feels like you're an orphan everywhere you go. You don't have a home. You don't have an origin story. You don't understand your own identity. It's like soul level amnesia. We can correct some of that and go back and retrace some of that because energy can never really truly be destroyed. So there is like a location aspect where we can go back and find those pieces of self that have been rejected. But again, takes time, takes energy, takes a lot of channel time. And sometimes it's not what's best for the client. Like sometimes they've got a lot of other stuff going on. So I guess we're limited to our human time as for like what's the most important because records are so infinite. But yeah, your soul group is like it's boosters. That's what they're called. That's why it's weird. It's weird for us in our human tongue. Like it has a noise, it has a vibrational frequency. I met one today that was so interesting, and it was just like a noise. But the way they said you would call it this because it translates to human as this. So I'm assuming it translates into human as rainbow people or colorful people, right? People of whatever, like that's just how they would translate it to us because there are so many. We have to consider there's so many infinite languages. Some soul groups don't even speak at all. They're all telepathy, so they have no original language. It could be translated to us. Some are clicks and sounds, some are humming. So it's interesting because every name we have ever had as souls and soul groups are translated. They're not natural to their language, and the way we speak on every dimension and place matters. It's all different. So we are all here to evolve and grow. We are all here to merge consciousnesses. The idea is oneness, meaning everybody who's ever been involved on earth will eventually merge their souls so deeply that they may become one hyper consciousness, one overall arcing consciousness, which is what the realm is. It is the house of that consciousness. So we all have access to the realm, even if we don't have access to all the records. And that's life planning. That's where we go when we have dreams. It's where we go when we die. It's where we go before we incarnate. It's where we go to visit loved ones and relatives. It's usually where we go during mediumship connections. We're usually at the realm. They have like visiting centers and hours. So it is our oneness, our consciousness. What some people even call heaven is the realm. They are usually confusing the realm for heaven because that's where we go to after life in order to heal and repair. The white light, that's home, that's the realm. The realm is the hub of all soul groups. So there we are evolving and growing all the time, but true evolution, like I have seen soul groups that have been in merger for like billions of years and still have their own identities because there's so much information that has to be integrated and exchanged. And essentially true evolution and mastery is when this soul group knows everything about this soul group and this soul group knows everything about this soul group. They are now one database because all of the information is repeated It's all exchanged. It's one database. So that's what we mean by oneness. We are coming to a master consciousness of all these soul groups and abilities into oneness. The databases all match. They're all the same. And that's a lot of work, especially while we're still incarnating, because we're creating more information, right? So, although our goal is oneness, it doesn't mean we're there today. It means that we're just working towards it. And it can take a very, very long time to create that. And I don't think we will ever be fully one. And what I mean by that is there's always going to be a new planet or a new place to inhabit and a new place to experience and a new soul group to adapt to and understand and learn from. But that's our goal. Is master merger means we are always on an evolutionary track to understanding the cosmos, and as much as we can. We are trying to grow. We are trying to evolve. Oh, you're muted. I can't hear you.
Okay, so that leads me to my other question, because I was thinking when Judy asked about, the state of our world today and the people that are in charge and how, if the Akashic, if there's a council and then they have control over everything, if I'm understanding right, because it has been a lot of information, but if we are down here trying and raising the consciousness to try to become, this oneness here for the highest good, does that kind of help with what she was asking? Like, is that a part of why these evil, people and evil spirits and different things are at bay or not able to do what they think they can do?
Yeah, so the more Earth ascends, the less accessible it becomes to certain demonic entities and energies, for sure, 100%. That it's just like the more we heal, the less accessible we become as individuals to demonic intrusion, because we are so self-aware, and there's very little trauma in us left, or little suffering in us left. They remember, spirit says pain is inevitable, suffering is a choice. Suffering is a side effect of trauma, right? We keep it, we hold on to it. It's an emotional wound. The more suffering we embody, the easier it is to impede on that, to intrude on that, to infiltrate, because it's easier for them to hide in our suffering. Suffering is self-destructive, right? We're always kind of like in a loop of our own self-destruction. So the more we heal, the less likely we are to be possessed. It's very hard and uncomfortable for them to do it. It's like living in that high-pitched sound that you get sometimes when the mic does the thing and everybody's like, ah, shit, my ears. That's what it feels like to them, joining a high frequency when they are not of high frequency. So it's a lot harder to live in that type of energy. They have to live in your self-destruction. So again, if Earth continues ascending, yes, that is the goal, that there will be less possibility of intrusion, but also less people suffering. So that allows them to not be energetic houses of safe places for demonic entities on Earth. And Earth is an energetic being and body. It's a God, it's a creator. So it has chakra centers of its own, and we affect it just as it affects us. So our ascension equals Earth's ascension. Our ascension directly affects the body we embody, right? So it helps our soul group and Earth. And as Earth ascends, it becomes more protected. Of course, that's why it houses us. That's why we have this relationship with it. It's supposed to be symbiotic, but sometimes it can feel parasitic, especially because humans, a lot of these souls aren't from Earth. So I feel like what has happened is they have not appreciated Earth like they should, because it is not really their home. They know they're visitors. They know this is temporary, and they treat it like it's temporary, which is awful, right? Because Earth has been amazing and plentiful. And the more we heal our relationship with our body, the more we heal our relationship with Earth, because our body is an extension of Earth, right? So anything that's good for our bodies is good for our planet. They're connected, they're the same. So we are deeply connected, and we do preserve Earth and protect Earth with our evolution, and that we do affect Earth with our lack of evolution. So again, more endangered if we don't do something to ourselves or for ourselves.
Got it. Amazing. Gratitude.
These are such good questions, guys. I'm going to review this comment here. Each soul group has their own council, not always. Soul groups can be one individual remaining, or they could be billions of individuals. So their system of accountability, law, or order depends on the soul group and the specifically, just the soul group in general. The angelic soul group cluster is huge, one of the largest soul groups currently incarnated on Earth. They do have a council, a governing system. They are very developed on their order system. Arcturians don't. They have essentially like a king and queen. So it depends on the soul group and how large they are, developed they are, and everyone has their own individual systems. Like the Palladians, like I said, Palladians have a council. So they have a group of leaders that counsel together and lead together. Amy, hello.
Good morning.
Morning.
Okay, couple questions. I'll try and piece all of these together. I was meditating with spirit. I don't know how long ago it was. Feels like yesterday, but I'm sure it was like a couple weeks ago. And I got the impression that there was another mass walkout happening that I had just tucked away in the back of my head for a little bit. Is this something that's intentional in the Akashic realm right now for the next shift that it feels like that we're going through because of the disclosure that we've been seeing within the media recently? And, the whole movie Disclosure Day and possible contact with aliens maybe next year, according to some other people out there.
Yeah, Spirit said 2027 would be the year for a huge transformation, but it's also going to be a very destructive year because 2028 would be our spiritual revolution, like the beginning of it. But the beginning of it in a transformational way, I should check back on that because that was probably 3 years ago they told me that. And I feel like so much is changing that we don't really know. But as for a mass exodus, yes, but not because of disclosure. Because as we evolve, you'll all notice that we're manifesting very quickly. And what that means is if you are deeply traumatized and wounded, it is manifesting as physical health issues immediately. People are getting sick fast and aggressively. And it's because they're so unaware of how their energy affects their body. As we ascend into higher levels of consciousness, our ability to manifest does become almost instantaneous. So our traumas become our direct reality, and it is violent. And people don't understand how uncomfortable that can feel and how painful that is. So some people, yes, are choosing to leave because it will be very uncomfortable for them in the future, but also because they're not healing. If you're not healing, it's manifesting very fast into diseases, issues, cancers, illnesses, heart issues, breathing issues. A whole bunch of things are happening almost suddenly. It's like all of your decisions are finally catching up to you all at once. And it's very heavy and scary for humans, really, because they don't understand why it's happening. The idea is we're here to develop tools for healing, soul level healing, interdimensional healing. And in 30 or so more years, people will be born with the opportunity to clear whatever trauma they came in with right off the get-go. They wouldn't have to carry it into the manifestation process. Their parents will be healed. Their parents will not be projecting it onto their children either. So the idea is with enough energy clearing, we can now be born into this cycle without the catastrophe of our physical health taking over or our energetic trauma leaking onto our biology, which there's a whole center in the Akashic realm for DNA planning. And the way they explained this to me was really fascinating. They said, your soul dictates which genetic information surfaces. And you're allowed, essentially, we plan a life with this assumption that you're going to have this genetic makeup, but there is always going to be negative aspects or things that are possible in that genetic makeup because your family carries trauma. So you're susceptible to your family line, your lineage, the trauma they created and how that may surface in you. So what it means is you could be born with this plan to be this type of person, but your wounds and trauma may actually trigger this genetic makeup, which carries diseases and issues and ailments. And that is a potential reality that you have available to you if you do not heal, if you do not work on things. So we do sometimes have these illnesses that show up in our DNA because of that, not because we were supposed to be punished, but because they have manifested and triggered in our genetic code based on our generational trauma and lineage and how that continues through us. So the idea is we activate less of that negative DNA when we are healed. It's just so less diseases, less issues, less trauma being transferred.
That answers that. Can I piggyback on the DNA question? Because when I've taken DNA tests like 23andMe and Ancestry.com, there was always like that 1% that always was unspecified or unidentified. And there was a lot of conspiracy theories that that is alien DNA. And some of those people were being targeted for that through the back end of these conglomerates that have oversight on that DNA. So, is this something that the Akashic realm is aware of, and how are we? Is there any disclosure on that part of our unidentified DNA where we're going to eventually see in the media that, yeah, we are all alien and we've always known it because of the genetic testing that we have?
I don't think there's anyone in our present day world that isn't somehow affected by alien alterations and interjection. I think that would be very, very rare. They're probably not even here anymore. But what actually is the most alien travels through Native American bloodlines, or native bloodlines, I should say. And it is really what you should be looking for are the ancient belief systems and practices. People who are deeply connected to earth, respectful of energy, read people, understand things they shouldn't, channeled, believed in things in the sky. These societies are deeply connected to aliens and their involvement. And we see it in the Aztecs, we see it in South America, we see it in Peru, we see it in the Native Americans, we see it in some Chinese natives, we see it in some Inuits in the, in the ice regions. It's everywhere. The evidence of deeper connected beings are everywhere. And that's why the attack on America, the infiltration and the diseases and the trauma was so awful, because we did have two very different types of people existing on Earth for a purpose. We had the earthly minded. The earthly minded were supposed to create technology, technological advancements, and learn from war. That was, and the reason why they learned from war is because a lot of Earth's evolution happens through war or cycles of war for those types of people. Meaning, like, if they need to be powerful, they need to conquer, they need to take over, they feel unsafe, they're going to work on evolution, evolving their technology. And so it was a type of evolutionary involvement that they had control over. The other types of people were the natives, deeply connected to earth, to nature, healers, herbs, gardeners, medicine men, shamans, advisors, priestess, right? They're two very different types of people. The idea is both of them were supposed to evolve to such a place where they could find union, and they could be the earthly evolved and the spiritually evolved and create union, which is human evolution. So really what we're looking for is the DNA of those people. Usually what we find is the unknown 1% or so is just that they don't understand DNA. People don't understand how complicated DNA is. They could never comprehend the vastness of these genetic books and keys. And what I mean is they're trying to analyze what individual strands mean, but the truth is, like, one particular type of strand interacting with another strand can tell a completely different story than an individual strand. And they're still trying to locate where they're all from and how they all affect each other and where they all mixed or originated or all of the above. And there's still a lot of things they don't know about humans in general. So a lot of the missing pieces are just that science doesn't have all the answers yet. But the main key factors are native blood. And native blood doesn't always say native blood. Like, for example, it could say Iberia, it could say Inuit, it could say Native American, it could say Taino, it could say a bunch of different things. But really, those are the markers that there was alien intrusion. So those are the evolved species, the ones interconnected to more than just Earth and themselves. They're connected to all things. And then there's the ones that were designed to be connected to only their environment and see the world as science and math in order to develop science, math, and structure.
That's really cool. I know that I think we have dormant DNA as well, and I'm curious if now with the up-leveling and shifts that we're going through, if the Akashic realm is, the powers that be are allowing some of that dormant DNA to come online. That's the last question I have.
What dormant DNA means is, again, we are functioning really mostly in our third dimensional bodies. And what dormant DNA is, it's an active strain of your energy field that can trigger other dimensional aspects and abilities of you, meaning you're responding to more than just DNA in the third dimension. You are now on other dimensional levels of this expression. You're connecting to other places, which means self-healing, self-repair, right? It means that I can now correct my own body and work through my own body with tools outside of my DNA. I can activate new levels of myself. That's what they mean by that. And it's amazing because there's so much outside of this dimension that we simply could never comprehend. Like, for example, being able to see into other planets, dimensions, realms, places, or spaces, that's upper dimensional vision. That's higher dimensional vision. And that's why we're so consumed by our physical. Our third dimensional reality is our present reality, which is, why spirit sometimes makes us blind and deaf, because they want us to focus on other senses, because our visual spectrum will distract us from most things. In fact, there was a study done that said when people's eyes were forced shut, their other senses kicked in, but it took over their visual spectrum, because their visual spectrum was one of the strongest distractors of the brain. So even if our eyes are closed, our other senses start shooting in through our visual spectrum to create visual sensory input, which I thought was fascinating. So, like, spirit told me that I was intentionally built mostly blind because it forced me to open up my other abilities from a very young age and not know that I was training and understanding energy around me for survival. And that's why they do those types of things. We are too dependent. Our brain is too strongly dependent on our visual spectrum. So really what they mean is those levels of connectivity allow us to see so much more than we could ever imagine. And our DNA activations do come through at those levels of connection. We're able to tap into more and do more and affect consciousness more and integrate more, because it's a deeper level of energy, or a higher level of energy. So you're able to affect the program behind reality, right? And that's important. And we have DNA for that.
That's awesome. That reminds me when I had COVID and I was telling you, like, I can't smell anything. And so my smell was taken off of line and my hearing was taken off of line. And, I got over that bump and everything came back through some remedies. But and I remember saying, I feel like I'm purposely being suppressed with those senses so that I can work on other abilities during that time frame. And then, some gifts amplified after that.
Yeah, I think it was a long time ago. We channeled a thing about spirit using COVID as a tool of activation. And it was really supposed to give people an exit point that couldn't handle evolution and the gifts coming, and then activate the rest that were here. But then, negative powers that be, shadow government, whatever you want to call them, started weaponizing COVID. And that's where all the trauma came from. They started weaponizing it to control and limit people and make money and exploit people's fears. And that created a lot of trauma, and it extended COVID far beyond what it was supposed to be. So, and I believe everybody got it. I think that you may not have seen symptoms, but you definitely got it, and definitely more than once, because it was an activation loop. It was supposed to be highly contagious for that purpose. Okay. Hi, Samara. I think you're next. Amy, does that answer all your questions? Sorry.
Oh, I take, we could talk forever, but no, it's someone else's time.
Hi,
Thank
Samara.
you.
Hi, this has just been so interesting today. Thank you. So I wanted to just, my question was about mental health, and I know that was way back in the conversation, but I just kind of see like, for me, it gets very confusing of like this fine line between some like spiritual enlightenment and brilliance and like mental health. So my question, because I'm like, how do I phrase this as a question, is you were talking about different perspectives and how like what the truth is based on someone's perspective. So that might be true for them.
Mhm.
So what makes perspective like just their own like delusions or visions versus an illness?
Yes, that's a great question. So, Spirit explained to me, I've actually worked with many clients who had mental illness. So I was able to see how their energy was functioning. And essentially what it looks like to me is their gifts are misfiring. They're not in control at all. Sometimes it means that dimensional barriers are non-existent altogether. So like, for example, when I see a haunting, I know that it's a haunting. Therefore, I know not to believe it or follow its guidance. And I know that that's not a good place for advice. Someone with schizophrenia has no boundary between a haunting or a person or a being or a soul or an angel. And they can be manipulated because they have no foundational understanding of it and no control over it. So essentially, they're just seeing hauntings and demonic entities all the time that can manipulate them, misinform them, really control them to do their bidding and finish their unfinished work, which is why it becomes such a violent illness, because you're dealing with lots of low vibrational entities that have a lot of suffering. So schizophrenia itself is a misused gift. It's a shattered ability. It's trauma through forced perception. And that happens often with drug use. People think that drugs are a good tool for spiritual development, and they are not. Drugs without the work, without the integration, without the healing, without the training, without the protection, absolutely can lead to mental illness. And they can shatter too many of your barriers and walls and protective systems that do not allow you to have control over what you are seeing, how you're seeing it, what it means. And so you're going to get all misinformation. And that's why people in that world are very difficult to kind of like listen to and make sense of. Like sometimes you can see or feel the wisdom in it, even though it's like completely loopy, because it is coming from, sometimes a wise place, but is completely ungrounded and they don't understand it often themselves. So it's a very dangerous way to attune to your gifts because there are major side effects. Mental illness is also can also be created by severely backed up emotional trauma. Lots and lots of lives of emotional trauma can absolutely present themselves in this life as mental illness. It's very easy to trigger that. So the idea is, and hypersensitive people, it is usually the intuitive hypersensitive people that carry all that emotional baggage because they absorb everything. So it is very common in the spiritual world, if used improperly, to not tap into that realm by accident or to have those side effects if you are not healing, protecting yourself, knowing what you're talking to, knowing what's guiding you, going about the process the right way, not participating in, drug binges and trying to shatter your walls and boundaries and barriers with drugs and other hallucinogenics. It can be a very dangerous process. What I say to people is the way Spirit explains reality to me is that your shared reality becomes truth. And what that means is if I'm channeling something people can confirm or find evidence in, and I know stuff about people that can be confirmed, it is a shared reality. So it is truth. It is truth for us both, right? When you're dealing with people with mental illness, there is no shared reality. You come to the conclusion very quickly that none of the stuff they say comes true. None of this stuff reflects me. None of this stuff makes sense in their outer world. None of the people around them agree with it. So there's this lack of shared reality. And it's because their reality is so much in shambles that they can't necessarily ground it to one structure, person, place, system, or thing. So mental illness and gifts are deeply aligned, and it's because people don't really know how to use their gifts or heal enough to get there. And sometimes those walls shatter in between, your ability and your physical brain, and it creates all that misinformation and all of that lack of control and all of that trauma. Let's see, anything else? People should know what they're talking to and what they're doing, and gifts should continue evolving. And that's how you know someone is on a kind of self-repair slash healing slash, spiritual awakening, and not just in a self-destructive loop. Also being able to implement what you preach, right? That people are actually doing the work they're channeling, which means they're also growing. So it's a side effect that they're growing. Let's see, anything else? Did I forget to answer any parts of that?
I guess it just, because I've been dancing with like this whole like paradox part where like, is it, is it mental illness or is it enlightenment? And can it be a little more of like gray area where sometimes like some actions and some might cross the line, whereas it seems to me like it's a fine line. But what you're saying, if I understand you correctly, is if you're doing the work, if you're healing, if you're very clear and grounded and it's not drug induced, and that it's more on this side. But I don't know. It seems like it's not so black and white to me. I don't know.
I think that the way people try to connect to their soul often leaves more of the gray space, because they're not going about it with the healing and the self-repair and, the meditation and the accountability. And that's hard for them. They would rather just go do acid or ayahuasca and peyote and then talk about that experience. But the idea is that experience isn't permanent. That experience bled into your reality becomes a type of delusion. You're not obtaining it from anything grounded or true or real or consistent in your world. It does leak into delusion because it's not serving your present moment. It's just serving a moment in your life, right? And that can't be the anchor in which we develop or establish. Like the point of this whole entire experience is that all of us have a constant guidebook to our highest best self. If we are focused, healing, trained, do the work, meditating, we always have this constant flow and download and information from a higher entity, a greater power that helps us make good decisions, be safe, choose the right people, follow the right opportunities. So there's this continuous string of evidence and evolution and growth that comes through. If you are the type of person that is talking about that one time you did ayahuasca, there is no constant continuous strain of information leading you. In fact, it is misleading you because you're anchored to a past experience for future evolution. So it's always going to be misleading. It's always going to be misinformed. It's always going to be, like I said, a non-shared reality. It no longer serves you. You may learn something that serves you in that moment, but it no longer serves you unless it's continuous. So I do see where you guys as people will see more of the mental illness than the gifts. That makes a lot of sense in that public world. I, on my end, see more of the gift than the mental illness because I'm working with all these amazing gifted people and we're getting evidence every day and we're training and understanding those. I do work with mental illness too, and I understand I understand exactly where they got what they got, which is one of the most powerful things that Spirit said is if it's true for them, it's true because it's true for them. So I need to figure out where it's true, how it's true, when it happened, and what's happening to them to make them think that that's true for them. And not, is it true or not true, right? That's not my job. My job is, if you believe it's true, but where? Where is it true? Is that your past life? Is this your gift misfiring? Is this something you're downloading and misinterpreting? And that has helped me help them better because it's very confusing to be in a brain like that. And one of the hardest things I've ever had to do is I do work on murder cases and, police cases, missing persons cases, and all of the stuff. And one of the hardest things I've had to do was try to interpret the mind and brain of a mentally ill murderer. And that was such a mind fuck because, again, the way that they think makes no sense to me at all. And I had to sit in that and just repeat the things that they were saying and hearing and doing. And it was so taxing and exhausting for my brain, but also fascinating in a lot of ways. And it was coming from some truth, but also it was a type of schizophrenia. It was a type of mental illness. So it was coming from some truth, but I could see how they misinterpreted it into this wild delusion and misinformation and thought that this was a good idea. And then even hearing him talk about how it's no longer a good idea and go back and forth in this like shared reality, not shared reality, shared reality. And it was such a mind fuck. I swear it was so hard to get out of it because it was just so strange for me to live there for a minute. But it is a very difficult place. And essentially what he was doing is bleeding realities. So it is true. There is no gray space for me because I understand and see exactly where they're getting that from. But I understand how on that side, looking into it, absolutely, you're going to see a lot of gray space because it's impossible to understand how somebody's thinking. And that's the scary part, right? Like you don't understand how they're thinking or why they're thinking or where they're getting that from.
And is it, I mean, looking at like the origin and then sort of the solution, I mean, am I correct that the origin is usually some type of trauma or repeated trauma? Like that's kind of what triggers the truth
Kind of,
that they're seeing?
kind of like sometimes it could be elemental trauma. And what I mean by that is like one time we had it was really interesting. One time I went into this person's past lives and they had mental illness established by drug induced CIA control, like governing control. They were trying to activate gifts in them and giving them like tons of hallucinogenics and drugs and things that damaged their nervous system, damaged their brain, and that trauma continued and bled into this life. So they were still suffering from some of that. One time it was electrocution. The electrocution disrupted their neurons and created so much damage that they were still struggling with that. So like their brain was struggling to make connections in this reality and would sometimes leap to other realities because they were closer than the connections in this reality. Sometimes it's metal. People don't understand the trauma metal has in the body and the brain. We shouldn't even be mining. Metal is so poisonous to the body. We shouldn't even be mining. But we do because we love metals. And Spirit said that we have enough metal surfaced on Earth to recycle it for literally the rest of time and to be more resourceful. But we don't do that. We just keep mining, keep pulling it up, keep poisoning ourselves in our waters and in our bodies. And it destroys the brain, the body, the nervous system. Is probably more dangerous than plastic, to be honest, because metal trauma, shrapnel, metal in your body can traumatize you for many lifetimes. So like, for example, I've had war vets come through with shrapnel in their brain and they had things like autism and mental health issues and issues connecting because they were still energetically unaligned from that trauma from that previous life. It was still poisoning them to this day. So sometimes it's like environmental is what I'm trying to say. It's not just behavioral trauma or past life trauma. Sometimes it's physical trauma. But there's a lot of things that do show up in that can create that tear of reality. Sometimes it's just a misused gift or a lack of training too. Like sometimes it's not that serious. It's just they have no idea what they're doing. And they've misused that gift for so long that it would take a lot of humility and humbleness to correct it, which I often find that correcting the gift isn't the problem, it's their ego. They've used it that way for so long that they have a problem admitting they were doing it wrong. So they don't want to correct it. And that's actually a problem I've come across a lot. There are a lot of gurus who do that. You know, they are so deeply embedded in their way of perceiving the world that they refuse to see any other view or way. And that's fine. That's their job. That's their mission. I don't need to correct or force that correction. But it is an interesting perspective.
Thank you. And then just to wrap it then on the other end of it, not from the origin, but sort of the getting out of the mental illness. I mean, I think it's, from what I've learned from you, it seems like it's grounding in meditation and maybe sometimes, you know, psychiatric help or things to sort of balance it.
Psychology is very limited in this lifetime. That's one of the things I'm supposed to work on. We're supposed to transfer or evolve psychology to more interdimensional realities, meaning like we should be okay telling psychologists that we see ghosts and that we hear voices, and they shouldn't leap to medication and, institutions and all of that, because we are interdimensional beings. But a lot of psychology in its ancient practice says like ghosts don't exist, that it's all mental illness, and that's not real anymore. So it's a very limited practice. And I find that a lot of gifted people are afraid of going and afraid of being honest and afraid of being authentic because of the judgment that comes with that and the fear of being medicated and, mistreated in that field. There are some great up and coming psychologists today that do integrate the spiritual and they understand it fully. So it's evolving slowly, but really what we need in the future is interdimensional psychology. We need to understand how all of our lives affect our present day, and we need to go deep with it. That does help clear mental illness at that level. But really, it depends on the person, the mental illness, what's going on, their soul, their past lives. Like I said, if it was a physical trauma, we need to correct the physical trauma. If it was mental, emotional trauma, it's going to take a lot longer. We need to work with them longer. We're going to need to do more past life work, but it has to be gentle because they're already mentally fragile. Spirit leads, spirit decides what's good for them or not good for them. I do not have control over that, right? I'm not at a place where I can say, this is going to solve all your problems. I just sit there and channel, and spirit says that, right? So I don't really know when I first meet someone what it will take. I just know that over time, with their participation and my participation, that it gets better. And sometimes they quit, sometimes it's too hard, sometimes they can't follow it through. And that's their peak. That's where they've met it. It's gotten better, but now they need a break, right? So it is hard and difficult and mentally straining to shatter your reality over and over and over again, right? So to reconstruct your reality can be very difficult. And so you have to respect when people are overwhelmed.
Thank you.
Very welcome. Hi, Neil.
Hey, Jessenia. Thank you for this. I just wanted to piggyback off of what Samara was sharing, and also what Rosalind said about rainbow kind of made me think of this. So just some context. I was gifted a reading, which I'm always grateful to accept. And, Anthony's just on my ass about this book. So we're definitely on the right track about that. But this guy brought up this interesting concept about crystal souls. And it's so wild because he did say that he's only heard of it as a concept, like didn't know it well, but it was really specific in terms of like profound sensitivity to light, emotion, energy, other people, deep sense of empathy, peaceful, loving nature, inability to tolerate or even comprehend cruelty or conflict.
Yeah, some people call the rainbow people crystal people.
Okay.
Because
yeah,
their eyes are
that's the last thing he said.
Gigantic crystal-like orbs. They're so fascinating. They have these big, beautiful, like deep crystal-like eyes. So some people do call the rainbow people crystal people. I think Rosalind and I spoke about that when I was telling her about her soul group. But
is it a concept or like a thing?
So this particular soul group is really interesting. They usually incarnate as animals because human emotion and trauma and violence is so difficult for them that they usually choose animal bodies on purpose for that.
Interesting. So yeah, because he brought up the green eyes and all the things, but also kind of like piggybacking on what Samara was talking about. I mean, I don't think it also seems like those symptoms, for lack of a better word, are what Anthony experienced as part of autism. So I don't really feel like comfortable like going around saying, oh, it's not autism, it's this crystal concept. But
what's interesting is the indigo soul group. There are soul groups that are more susceptible to certain labels and titles and things for sure. And the indigo soul group is often associated with extreme levels of autism. This is like the overwhelming, can't communicate kind of version. And the reason for that is the indigo soul group is they absorb so much outside information that in their brain it is so stressful to be in there, and their brain is so overwhelming. They don't just see a room, they go into a room and see a million things. They're constantly fed sensory overload. They have no filter. They can't shut anything out. They feel every emotion, every color, every shift, every noise, everything. And because of that, they have a really hard time communicating or functioning in the expression of it. They're just absorbing it. They're like overwhelmed with it. So it's like talking, trying to go, Mach 5. Like it's almost impossible for them. That's how they function. That's what it's like being in their bodies. So that level of soul group does usually come in those types of bodies, and there is a direct correlation to their hypersensitivity. They also evolve Earth a lot faster. So they might evolve Earth in 10 lives because they absorb so much information from this experience that they are done. They've taken in everything they need to take in. And by like the 10th life, they're just these super in tune woke babies that know everything about soul, consciousness, past lives, transfer of energy, everything. They're just super in tune and aware. So that is true. We do have some soul groups that, like I said, not all soul groups are compatible to Earth. We do have some that take on these extreme side effects. But the trauma with indigos is it's so horrible and painful being here that most of them don't want to come. So they're not very common on Earth, and they usually quit before they accomplish their mission, because it's like experiencing 100 lives in one, and it's a lot. And we can't barely manage one life. Imagine 100 lives in one. So the soul group does change how we function and how we process energy, and our gifts matter too. Some hypersensitive people, like I said, have certain characteristics or side effects that are more likely based on your gift structure. Like Spirit says, your greatest gift is first your greatest burden. If you're a hypersensitive, in tune telepath, you're going to have major Earth issues until you control that and attune that. So sometimes it's just our gifts. Sometimes it's our gifts and our soul. Sometimes it's our gift, soul, and our trauma. Sometimes it's just trauma, but all of that matters. Yes, it's possible.
Cool. Thank you. That's really helpful. I appreciate it.
Welcome. Hi, Janelle.
Hey, how are you?
Great, great, great.
I'm not really sure how to word this the best way. Um, so long time ago we had talked about my soul group origin, which you had said it was Pleiadian merged into Arcturian.
Mhm.
I guess my question is, so Arcturian home base was destroyed. Were any of the records destroyed in that process? I guess the question that came up was, does the Akashic realm house, like for me, instance, all of my soul group records, no matter like where they come from, or depending
Well,
on
the
the soul, do they
Arcturian,
sit somewhere else?
no, the Arcturians specifically have been merged, yes. Their specific records have been a part of the Akashic realm for a long time. They have merged with a lot of other soul groups, mostly angelic. So the Palladian merger is a little bit more rare than the angelic. Angelic merger is more common, but they did kind of merge into other soul groups and work really deeply with the realm and with Earth. They're very tied to Earth's evolution right now. So really like they're key players in Earth's evolution because they understand duality and war and trauma because they experienced it. So their wisdom is super important right now on Earth. But the records have been there, yeah. We didn't lose Arcturian records because there were survivors. So the survivors merging into other soul groups means the records are available to us.
I guess I was confused because you said typically, like you said, the Arcturians merged into others, but I went the other way. So how does that work?
Well, the Palladians are very good record keepers. Anyway, so you just would bring your information into the Palladian soul group. So your records would have come with you into the Palladian soul group. So your memories are still with you. Now, some of the souls were completely kind of lost into the other side. Really, what happened is it wasn't destroyed, it was absorbed by the other side. Like, okay, so the story of Arcturians that I think is so fascinating is they were born on ground zero. Ground zero is a worse place to be born because we have what we call planes of evolution. Planes of evolution mean the closer you get to ground zero, it's almost like being born in a black hole. Like you're going to get ripped apart eventually. The whole process of the energy, so it's an energetic alignment. It's not really a location, if that makes sense, but the energy on Arcturus was 50-50. So actually, it's funny. I feel like all Arcturians I've ever met have a yin yang or a compass or an anchor tattoo, and it's everyone I've
I drew them all the time when I was a kid.
right. It's just like the weirdest thing, but it's something about their location, and they are yin yang for me. When I see them, I see yin and yang. I see the darkness and the light. They are 50-50. They are balanced. They are duality. They represent this in their work. And what ended up happening is that they were constantly at war, because essentially half of them were on the negative polarity, half of them were on the positive polarity, and they were trying to descend and ascend at the same time. So they were constantly at war, trying to figure out who would win, ascension or descension, because they were on ground zero. So they were being ripped apart from the inside out. They were always having political issues, war issues, problems. And the other interesting thing is that they usually fell into relationships with each other. So a lot of the trauma is they lost, family members and lovers and people, because they were all so deeply interwoven. It wasn't like they were literally split down the middle. It was like they were bleeding into each other and compassionate, loved each other, but completely different views on how things should be run. So like our, Republican Democrat, we can have Republicans and Democrats in the same house, but it's okay unless you talk politics, right? So their continuous war eventually ripped apart the planet. They destroyed themselves, and the survivors fled. But what happened is some of them descended, some of them ascended. So the ones that ascended were some of the most powerful informants for evolution, the Akashic records, and all of the soul groups that took them in. I remember reading this and hearing about this and thinking, wouldn't people not want them because they were always fighting and stuck in whatever? And they said no, because they think in a way we do not. And they brought with them extreme tools for negotiation, for communication, warfare tactics, defense tactics, self-preservation. They are great peacekeepers because they've had to keep the peace literally since the day they were born. So they brought all this really powerful information with them that helped evolve the soul groups, because they forgot how to do any of those things because they didn't need those skills at their levels. So it was really important, vital information they brought into these soul groups. They were highly regarded and awarded high positions. Actually, they were put into leadership positions, guardian positions, council positions, general positions, defense and protection and education. They usually are very highly regarded and treated very respectfully in the soul groups they merger into. And then the rest of them that descended. So there's this constant loss and pain and void of like losing the loved ones. The ones that descended would have taken their records with them, but overall, because it was half and half, like you have the experience that still traveled with them and the records that still stayed with them. So they still exist, just in a place we can't access them, but we can access the rest of them, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, I'm still just trying to figure that whole thing out.
Yeah,
The
so
whole
we
Arcturian
have
thing.
all the records, is what I'm saying.
Okay.
And they've already merged into a lot of other soul groups. Not all of them are hybrid. Some of them are. Hybrid just means you've merged so deeply into a soul group. Like some of them left way before the war, so because they realized I can't live here peacefully, and so they fled and went to other places. So those particular ones have already become hybrid. They've taken on personality traits of other soul groups. Like for example, Amy's in angelic elite, which is or what is your particular soul level name? Is that it? It's angelic and Arcturian mix.
Yeah, Arcturian elite.
Yeah.
So
okay. From your book. Yeah.
They look like angelic warriors. They look like goth angels. So that's the merger. They look different than angelics. They look different than Arcturians.
I guess I was confused because I merged from a Pleiad into an Arcturian, and I wasn't sure, like, the ones that aren't merged, are they just like floating around like the Arcturians?
Yeah, they have their own bases and databases and places. They just don't have an actual planet.
Yeah, I guess that's the part that's
a dimension is not a planet. A dimension is an energetic place everyone can travel to. It's your home. It's your home body. They would have had to reestablish some type of home dimension, which would be more like a realm. Realms are created, dimensions are born. So really what would have happened is their home dimension was destroyed and they had to reestablish a home realm and a home database. And therefore, they have a hub to come in and out of, but most of them have just merged into other soul groups.
Okay. That helps. Thank you.
Very welcome. Hi, Michael.
Hello. Okay, well, I'm not sure if we have. I'll tell you the three questions that I have, and maybe they all kind of answer together, in whatever we have left. So, my question is about more like hauntings and things. So, if we choose to haunt after a life, and we sever that cord to our higher self, and then our higher self doesn't have access to that, but yet that haunting that soul or whatever will haunt future incarnations. Can anyone or does anything in the Akashic realm track that? And does our higher self have full access to the Akashic realm? Like, I know that they would be a part of life planning, but like, yeah, so those two are kind of like sort of mixed together. And then also, do our creators have access to the Akashic realm with us when we're planning a life, or do they just sign off on it after we create that in a life planning?
Okay. So the reason for psychics and psychic channels is to help locate and release trapped souls from Earth. We have to be anchored to this dimension or in order to attune to the dimension and clear them. They do have free will. They need counsel. They need therapy. So much like humans, it is about healing and counseling them into transfer, and that can't be done by higher realms. The way they explained it to me is, it's like finding crumbs in a couch cushion. It's really hard for them to see it. They just see the couch. We have to go into the cracks and peer in through these dimensions and these layers to find anchor and help and assist, which is why we can call on angels once we locate them, but they struggle locating them without being called, if that makes sense. And they need therapy, so they have free will. So it's like they respect their free will and choice to be here. There are certain laws around not being able to interfere. We can locate them and then send them off for help, but it's really they're choosing help, they're choosing healing, they're choosing to cross over. If you force a soul over, you can get contracted or slapped on the wrist for karmic disruptions. Essentially, you can so people don't understand, once you mess with karma or the karmic wheel, you naturally absorb whatever repercussions would come from that. That's now your karma. So that's the greatest punishment and the worst punishment at the same time, right? It's like you don't want to be dipping your toes in other people's shit when we've got so much shit on earth anyway, right? So there's laws and protection around that, but also you can't fully heal a soul that doesn't choose to cross over, because there will be a lot of negativity that they leave behind. And that negativity can also take on a form of a haunting. So it's like when people say I've crossed over layers of somebody, you're kind of forcing layers through. Somebody should cross over as one complete body so that you can make sure you got the job done. If somebody is disassociating or separating in order to cross over, it's because they're not done with their work here and they don't want to cross over. So you have to force through whatever you're trying to force through. And so that's a sign that, you're forcing a crossover instead of allowing it to find peace and heal and work through its trauma. But yeah, that's our job. Our job is to locate souls hidden in the cracks of the couch here on earth and then help them find peace or choose peace and cross over, and then alleviate the rest of their soul from that trauma, karma, negativity, pain, all of the pieces connected to that. I forgot what the other question was, though.
Thank you for answering that. The other one was, does our higher self and or our creator have access to the Akashic realm, and do they assist us hand in hand when we're creating a life or in any other parts of the Akashic realm, or is it just fragments of souls, things like that?
So when we locate a new soul group and we are introduced to them and learn about them, there is an exchange of energy that comes before that. And the exchange of energy is, we want to learn about you. We will give you access to the realm as an exchange for that. So we'll learn about you. You can learn about us. You grow with this exchange. There's everybody, it has to be equal exchange of information. So they get what we call a key. They get a key to the realm where they can visit, learn, almost view as third person observer. They can't affect it. It is just a viewing key. And part of that viewing key is everyone in their soul group gets to experience the realm incarnation and what it is about. Then they go into what we call a voting phase. Everybody needs to unanimously agree, or the majority needs to agree, depending on their politics on this planet or this dimension. And they decide if they're willing to take on that experience. They have to eventually say, like, hey, this is worth it for us, or this is not worth it for us. Almost unanimously, right? And then the soul would essentially, you're subjected to the human experience. If you're in, you're all in. There's nothing else you can do or control about that. They may advise their soul group beings, their participants. Their creator might advise, the creator might support, the creator might heal. It does absorb, it does watch, it does integrate with it, it does learn the lessons. It's like a feeding system. It's like all of these little bits of me are out there, and they're constantly feeding me information. So it's fully aware of everything going on, but its level of interference is still controlled. Obviously, we all know that because our creators aren't constantly dipping in and rearranging our realities and trying to protect us from our lessons. Everything's a lesson, everything's growth, everything is evolution. And it's like you have to be all in or all out because we have laws from interfering. So they would have voted already to do that. And then that's what the process looks like for every soul group and every incarnation for the most part, if they are compatible with Earth bodies and Earth's atmosphere. So they would have to go through all of this training first as a soul group. So essentially they would make that decision and then they go into training. And training is a trial period where their souls are tested to see how they absorb trauma. They're put in different simulations, not Earth. They're put in hyper-realistic simulations where trauma is a counterpoint. They want to see how they respond in pressure, respond under trauma, respond in this environment, and how their soul heals or doesn't heal well. Some souls do not heal at all. It's like so tragic and traumatic for them that it's almost impossible to alchemize their soul and move it on and out and evolve it. So they have to go through the trial process, and then they make their decision as a group. What was that like? Those are the 10 fallen. So the 10 fallen angels that came to Earth. Usually it's 10 or 10% of the soul group, so that they could get a good trial run and see how it affects the people in it, or the beings in it. And then they would make a decision if they're going to go all in or not go all in. So is it worth it for them? Sometimes just being the distant observers is enough because their soul cannot manage the trauma. So that's enough for them to just observe at a distance.
Okay, thank you. And so for all of us, like all of us here right now that have been here for hundreds of times, when we're planning a life, it's not necessarily like this fragment of my soul, Michael, now will plan the next life, but the oversoul plans the next life with everything that's been at play?
It depends. We have this one. So for example, if you were a victim of suicide, Michael would directly affect how that life was continued and planned. It would almost like force your higher soul to plan another life like Michael.
Okay.
Because you have disrupted the plan, you walked out on the plan, and now you need to correct whatever trauma remains before it bleeds into your oversoul. So usually what happens is they almost start replanning immediately, and it's usually a very similar life to the one you escaped. So it's like we think we're getting out, but we're not getting out, and that's the trauma. There's no punishment up there for suicide or something like that, but it is almost like a forced recorrection of our decisions, and we have to go back in and fix it because we're suffering, and we don't want our oversoul to suffer, our higher self, our collective. So in a situation like that, most of your lives are actually planned around the same time because the lessons are pretty generic, really, when it comes to the understanding of humans and what you're here to master and who you are and how you're made. Like they have all that information already. So most of these lives can be planned at the same time. And what they do is if there's a failure or a recurring theme or something, they just adapt to it. So like you would be a part of that, but also they're already knowing so much that it feels like we're not really a part of it.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much.
Welcome. Well, I loved this. It was a lot of fun. Would everybody be okay with us sharing this publicly? I feel like if we got permission from everyone, that would be a lot of fun because nothing personal came up, just really amazing questions about the Akashic realm. And I feel like this could be really useful for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So I'll have Amy reach out to everybody on here, just make sure we got consent and such so we can share. Because I think it's really good and not personal. And I would love to share just some of those questions you guys asked were mind blowing. I didn't even consider some of this stuff. All right, guys, it was great chatting today. Thanks for showing up and asking awesome questions.
Thank you.